When someone accidentally slips into forbidden logic, it doesn't happen in a dramatic flash or with some mystical sign. It usually happens in a quiet moment when the mind connects dots it was never meant to connect. It begins subtly, almost innocently, with a thought that feels too sharp, too precise, too revealing to be random. You start noticing patterns in places where others see routine, cycles in places where others see chaos, and structure in what most believe to be coincidence. You become aware of the invisible scaffolding behind human behavior, the unspoken agreements that govern societies, and the subtle manipulations that shape belief systems. This kind of awareness doesn't come from books or teachings, it emerges within you like a memory you never realized you had. But that natural emergence is exactly what makes it so threatening. Forbidden logic is the kind of understanding that bypasses conditioning, that leaps over the mental fences built by generations of control. Once your mind sees the blueprint behind the world, even if only for a moment, you cannot unsee it, and the keepers of those boundaries know it. It doesn't take long for the shift to attract attention. You start asking questions that disrupt the script, questions that imply you've wandered into restricted mental territory. You notice inconsistencies in narratives, patterns of silence in places where there should be answers, and trails of influence carefully hidden beneath layers of normalcy. Your mind becomes like a scanner, picking up frequencies that were always there but never audible until now. You don't realize it, but your consciousness begins to operate at a level that signals something to the gatekeepers, something like an unauthorized key being used in a lock system. The ones who maintain control over information flows and psychological structures have spent generations perfecting the art of obscurity. They rely on predictable thinking, on minds that stay inside the lanes designed for them. When someone steps out of those lanes, especially unintentionally, it signifies a breach in their architecture. Accidental access is the most dangerous type because it means the system is no longer airtight. If forbidden logic can emerge naturally within a person without training or initiation, then the gatekeepers must face the possibility that the design they depend on is fracturing. They fear minds like yours because you are a proof that awareness can rise on its own, like a flame that ignites without a spark. A deliberately awakened mind can be monitored and redirected, but a spontaneous one cannot be predicted. It becomes an anomaly, a deviation in the mental grid, a variable that resists containment. That anomaly begins to influence how you interpret the world. You stop accepting surface explanations and start looking for origins. You begin sensing intentions behind actions, agendas behind systems, and truths behind the illusions people are taught to worship. This shift is subtle to most, but to those who guard ancient knowledge, it is a flashing alarm. You find yourself analyzing things with a clarity you didn't know you possessed. Symbols, decisions, events, and patterns no longer appear random, they carry meaning, structure, and purpose. You start recognizing how information is filtered, how narratives are constructed, and how certain truths are deliberately buried beneath acceptable versions of reality. You begin to see how fear, distraction, and mass conditioning keep people from noticing the design behind the design. The more aware you become, the more the gatekeepers sense the breach widening. They have always counted on people being too distracted, too overwhelmed, or too skeptical to notice the edges of the matrix they protect. But forbidden logic pushes you past those edges and into the territory where nothing is what it seems, and everything is connected in ways that challenge the rules they enforce. The cracks in their system widen each time you question what you were taught to accept without hesitation. You begin to understand that most people are conditioned not to think deeply, not to analyze beyond the socially approved limits of curiosity. The gatekeepers rely on this. They rely on people staying within the mental borders they've constructed. But your mind slipped through those borders without warning, leaving them scrambling to understand how it happened. They observe your shift in awareness like a glitch in a program. You no longer react predictably, no longer follow the script, no longer fit neatly into the frameworks they engineered. You become a variable that cannot be controlled, and that possibility threatens their entire structure of hidden influence. As you continue aligning with this forbidden logic, you stop being afraid of the truth and start being more concerned with authenticity. You begin to prioritize understanding over belief, clarity over comfort, and insight over illusion. You see through facades, noticing the motive behind the mask, the power behind the policies, and the intention beneath the interpretations society is fed. This is the moment the gatekeepers recognize that your thinking has evolved into something they cannot reverse. You're no longer susceptible to the subtle manipulations they use to keep minds domesticated. You've crossed a line that wasn't meant to be crossed, stepping into a realm of perception that exposes the fragility of the systems they maintain. Your accidental access reveals something they never wanted to acknowledge, that the truth has a way of finding the minds capable of handling it, even without permission or initiation. It shows that knowledge, no matter how deeply buried, still finds its way to the surface when someone's consciousness reaches a certain frequency. The gatekeepers fear this because it means control is not absolute, and influence is not infallible. They cannot contain every mind, cannot suppress every awakening, and cannot predict every anomaly. This realization shakes their confidence because your very existence as an awakened thinker is evidence that the boundaries they guarded so fiercely are dissolving. When a mind awakens without being guided, trained, or initiated, it becomes one of the most unpredictable forces the gatekeepers of hidden knowledge can encounter. They rely on structure, on hierarchy, on controlled assent. They expect that anyone seeking deeper truth must pass through their filters, their tests, their systems of permission. These systems allow them to evaluate, categorize, and monitor each seeker who steps toward the deeper layers of reality. But when someone's awareness expands on its own, outside of their oversight, it creates a breach they cannot easily define. They fear this because an uncontrolled awakening means the information they work so hard to restrict is becoming accessible through the human mind itself. The human mind, when unshackled by fear or conditioning, becomes a direct key to understanding realities they believed they alone could manage. This kind of awakening is not loud or dramatic at first, it is quiet, internal, and almost effortless. A person begins questioning things without knowing why, sensing hidden motives without prior training, understanding patterns without external instruction. These internal shifts bypass the gatekeepers entirely. They deal with initiates, not anomalies. An initiate follows the path they approve, the teachings they deliver, the pace they dictate. An anomaly follows no path at all. It simply awakens. And nothing is more threatening to a system built on control than a mind that evolves outside its jurisdiction. They cannot trace your influence, cannot track your development, cannot measure your capacity, because your awakening did not originate from their hands. It came from within you, which means it is organic, unpredictable, and uncontainable. The gatekeepers fear uninitiated minds because they do not follow the expected stages of awakening. Normally, those who seek truth go through layers of disillusionment, confrontation, and acceptance that can be monitored and shaped. A spontaneous awakening skips those layers. It arrives fully formed, bypassing psychological and emotional checkpoints that the gatekeepers rely on to maintain their hold. They understand that a mind like yours is harder to deceive, harder to distract, and harder to silence. Without the constraints of ritual or structured guidance, you evolve according to your own rhythms, not the ones they engineered. They fear this because it means you are thinking from a place they did not construct, using insights they did not provide, accessing depths they never authorized. This makes you a disruptive force in their architecture. Most minds operate within predictable patterns, responding to narratives, social programming, and external influences. Gatekeepers depend on this predictability. They design systems of information, education, entertainment, and belief that keep the majority fixed within predictable cognitive boundaries. But when someone begins questioning the architecture itself, when someone realizes the patterns behind the patterns, the silence behind the noise, the structure behind the illusion, it signals that they are no longer playing by the rules established for them. You become a variable in a system built entirely on constants. A variable that cannot be forecasted challenges the entire foundation of the gatekeeper's influence. The fear intensifies when they realize you cannot be unawakened. Once a person starts perceiving hidden motives in human behavior, subtle manipulation in social structures, or silent control in institutions, the mind shifts permanently. It does not revert to its former state. You start seeing connections that undermine their narratives, understanding cycles that expose their strategies, and sensing truths that weaken their authority. Every spontaneous insight you experience signals to them that their methods of control are losing potency. They fear the spread of such independent thinking because awareness is contagious. A single awakened mind can influence others, not through teaching, but simply through presence, energy, and clarity. Awareness radiates. It challenges ignorance. It breaks illusions without effort. Gatekeepers thrive on mystery, secrecy, and the illusion of superiority. They maintain their power by controlling who gains access to certain knowledge and at what pace. But when someone discovers truths naturally, without their intervention, the illusion of superiority cracks. It proves that deeper knowledge is not locked behind ceremony or hierarchy, it is embedded within human consciousness itself. The awakening of one independent mind hints at the possibility that anyone could awaken. And if anyone could awaken, the gatekeepers lose the monopoly they have guarded for generations. What they fear most is not the information itself being discovered, it is the democratization of insight, the idea that understanding reality does not require permission. Your awakening also disrupts the psychological structures built to keep people compliant. These structures rely on fear of the unknown, comfort in conformity, and reliance on external authority. But a spontaneously awakened individual does not fear the unknown, they are drawn to it. They do not seek comfort in conformity, they crave authenticity. They do not rely on external authority, they trust inner discernment. This mindset is dangerous to any system that relies on the masses remaining unaware, passive, and obedient. Gatekeepers lose power when people think for themselves. They lose influence when people question. They lose control when people awaken. A single mind capable of independent perception becomes a threat because it challenges everything they have engineered to maintain dominance. Eventually, what frightens the gatekeepers most is that they cannot predict what an organically awakened mind will understand next. You could uncover truths they haven't guarded well. You could expose mechanisms they've kept hidden. You could connect realities they believed were impossible to perceive without guidance. The unpredictability alone is enough to unsettle them. A mind like yours moves freely, unbound by indoctrination, untouched by manipulation, and unshaped by their frameworks. Your perspective is not influenced by their teachings, meaning your understanding is pure, raw, and untouched by their correction. They cannot anticipate your next realization, cannot prepare for your next insight, and cannot intercept your next awakening. When you begin thinking beyond the programmed boundaries, you step into a mental landscape that very few ever experience. Most people live their entire lives inside structures designed for them, absorbing beliefs handed down by systems that expect obedience rather than inquiry. These boundaries are not physical or obvious, they are woven into education, culture, belief, language, and even the wiring of emotion. They exist to keep thought predictable, manageable, and controllable. But when your mind crosses those unseen edges, even unintentionally, you start to perceive the world through a completely different lens. You begin noticing contradictions in places where others see certainty. You detect manipulation in traditions people follow blindly. You recognize the mechanics behind influence and the architecture behind mass thinking. This shift does not happen gradually, it arrives like a sudden recalibration of perception, an internal alignment that reveals a version of reality you were never supposed to witness. Thinking beyond programmed boundaries means you stop accepting information at face value. You question the source, the intention, the pattern, and the purpose behind everything. You see how people are guided by systems designed to shape their desires, fears, choices, and beliefs. You begin identifying how narratives are constructed to direct attention, how distractions are engineered to suppress curiosity, and how illusions are maintained to ensure conformity. The truth is not hidden in one place, it is hidden in plain sight behind layers of psychological conditioning. Once your mind surpasses those boundaries, you start recognizing how deeply people are controlled without realizing it. You observe their reactions, their limitations, their mental cages, and you understand that most are not thinking, they are repeating. They are not perceiving, they are being guided. And they are not choosing, they are following. Stepping into this higher state of awareness often feels isolating at first because you no longer relate to the default ways of thinking that surround you. Conversations feel shallow, beliefs feel borrowed, and social expectations feel artificial. You begin to sense how much of human behavior is influenced by unseen forces, ideologies, pressures, fears, and invisible scripts that dictate how a person should live, what they should value, what they should fear, and what they should never question. This awareness separates you from the crowd, not because you want to be separate, but because you can no longer fit into a mold designed to suppress the very type of thought you are now capable of. Your mind has moved into territory beyond the reach of those who rely on collective ignorance to maintain their influence. The consequences of thinking beyond the boundaries extend into every aspect of perception. You develop a heightened sensitivity to truth, authenticity, and intention. You can sense manipulation in language, detect hidden motives in behavior, and identify power dynamics disguised as innocence. This level of perception makes you immune to the tricks used to guide the masses. The fear-based tactics, the emotional triggers, the distractions, the false choices, they no longer work on you. You see through them with clarity. You recognize them as tools rather than truths. And once you see the tools, you cannot be shaped by them. This independence is precisely what the unseen architects of control fear most, a mind that thinks on its own, free from programming, free from obedience, free from influence. As your thinking expands, your intuition strengthens. You start to feel when something is off, even if you cannot explain it immediately. You sense when a narrative is manufactured, when a situation is staged, when a pattern is artificially constructed. Your mind becomes sharper, faster, and more discerning. You notice details others overlook. You question inconsistencies others accept. You challenge assumptions others fear to confront. This shift in mental energy creates a ripple effect within your consciousness, leading you deeper into layers of truth that most never reach. You begin understanding that the world is not shaped by what people know, but by what people are prevented from knowing. Thinking beyond the boundaries does not just reveal the truth, it reveals the mechanisms used to hide it. You start to understand how fear is used to block exploration, how doubt is used to weaken intuition, how ridicule is used to discourage curiosity. These psychological barriers are designed to keep people in line, but once your mind escapes them, they become invisible. They no longer hold power over you. You realize that the gatekeepers do not fear truth itself, they fear minds capable of perceiving truth without permission. And now you are one of those minds. You no longer need approval, validation, or guidance from them. You see beyond their illusions, and they know it. As you continue expanding, your inner world becomes stronger than the external one. You rely on your own discernment rather than accepted belief. You trust your insight over mainstream narratives. You prioritize clarity over comfort. With this shift, you no longer accept the version of reality you were raised in, you seek the version of reality that actually exists. And each layer you uncover pushes you further into realms of understanding once reserved for the initiated. But you arrived here through your own awakening, not through their paths, and that makes your perception uncontrollable. Eventually, thinking beyond the programmed boundaries leads you to one profound realization: the mind was never meant to be contained. The boundaries were artificial. The limits were illusions. The cage was psychological. And now that your awareness has extended beyond them, nothing can shrink it again. You've crossed a threshold that cannot be reversed. You've stepped into a realm of perception where truth is no longer hidden from you. And from this point forward, your mind will continue expanding into deeper clarity, sharper insight, and higher awareness, because once you begin seeing reality as it truly is, you can never return to the version they tried to convince you was the only one.